This is Dr. Charles Parker, and you're listening to Core Brain Journal. It's a place where I connect both fresh discoveries and interesting different perspectives from advanced mind science with the realities of real people and everyday life down on Main Street. Well, welcome, folks. Here we are, Dr. Charles Parker, one more time at Core Brain Journal, and we have one more very, very interesting guest. I'm so pleased to have this opportunity to be with you, audience members, because we have so many great people coming through the pipeline here. And I get a chance to learn from them. I get a chance to talk to them, and in the process of them telling me new things, then you can learn with me. It's very, very interesting. Tonight we have a guest, Penny Williams, who is a highly published author, and we're going to talk to her in just a moment about a variety of opinions that she has about autism and attention deficit disorder. So welcome, Penny. We're really happy you can be on board.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
So I'll do a brief intro, and then we'll find out where Penny is and what she's doing right now, and then we'll go from there. So Penny lives in Asheville, North Carolina. I told you the punchline on that one. She guides and mentors parents raising kids with ADHD and or autism. She's the parent of a son with ADHD and autism, the author of 3 award-winning books on parenting kids with ADHD. She's the founder and instructor for the Parenting ADHD and Autism Academy. She does some teaching. And a frequent contributor on parenting and children with ADHD for Attitude magazine, which is one of the largest magazines in the country regarding attention deficit disorder issues. And she also contributes to other parenting and special needs publications. So that is a mouthful. She's been very busy. I'm just going to say one other quick thing before we turn it over to her. She has won a couple of very significant book awards. So she's appreciated by a lot of people who are maybe even tuned in tonight to listen to what's going on. So in 2015, she won the International Book Awards winner for Psychology and Mental Health for her book, What to Expect When Parenting Children with ADHD. Subtitle is A 9-Step Plan to Master the Struggles and Triumphs of Parenting a Child with ADHD. So she won an International Book Award on that one. In 2014, the year before, she is writing prolifically, folks. She won through USA Best Book Awards for Parenting and Family, an award for Boy Without Instructions. Isn't that a provocative title? Surviving the Learning Curve of Parenting a Child with ADHD. She has a third book called The Insider's Guide to ADHD. Adults with ADHD Reveal the Secret to Parenting Their Kids with ADHD. That's a very interesting title itself. So she's very, very busy, and we really appreciate you taking the time to come out, Penny. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're up to tonight. What's going on?
Yeah, so my son was first diagnosed with ADHD back in 2008, which is over 8 years ago now. And for a long time, ADHD seemed to really explain his symptoms. He was certainly very hyperactive. He had a lot of executive functioning deficits. He has dysgraphia, which is a learning disability in writing. But as he got a little bit older, and some of the struggles should have been getting a little bit easier, he should have been learning, say, some social skills more than he had, we started to realize that autism was probably also playing a role for him. And so that diagnosis was added at age 12. So it was almost 6 years after his ADHD diagnosis before that really revealed itself and came to fruition. And I think, a lot of people ask why I pursued that second diagnosis, and I did really have to pursue it. It took 3 clinicians before someone recognized it, because he doesn't have the stereotypical symptoms of poor eye contact or really big obsessions. So it was easy to dismiss until somebody really dug deep and looked for it. And I really pushed for that because I felt like it led to a better understanding of him and his needs. And that's really kind of what's been my guiding principle, especially in the last few years as I've learned more as a parent, because I definitely jumped into this without any information. I was handed 3 fact sheets on ADHD, offered a prescription, and sent out the door. And I had no idea really what to do, where to go from there, and how to help him. So, I was just on this mission to really understand him in a very deep and meaningful way, not just to know that he was hyperactive and inattentive, but to really understand the reasons for his behavior and to understand exactly which behaviors were just being a little boy and which behaviors were really part of his disabilities. And that's taken a lot of time for me. Ross Greene's book, The Explosive Child, was a huge aha for us. That really helped us understand some different triggers that we didn't know about, and really how to work with him together instead of being the parent who has the hammer. And that's something I really learned when I was researching and talking to these adults who grew up with ADHD for that last book. Was the theme that kept coming out of all of those surveys and conversations was that that they wish that they had been more understood. If people had just understood why they struggled in school or why they didn't always follow instructions or whatever it may be, that would have been a better path for them growing up, and that a lot of them, when they did have good experiences, that was exactly why, because folks really understood and tried to work with who they were instead of changing them into our typical idea of a child.
Quote unquote normal, right?
Exactly. And I think, that's kind of the path that I have taken since researching and writing that book, is that our kids' personal truth, what's true for them in detail, is what should be our guiding compass as parents. So if my son refuses to do his homework, I could punish him, but that's not going to change the underlying issue of why he's refusing to do his homework. Mm-hmm. Is it too difficult? Is it overwhelming? Are his executive functioning deficits causing a barrier for him to feel like he can complete it successfully? Addressing those things helps. Giving him a punishment isn't going to change it the next time. The next time he feels that way or has that same struggle, it's probably going to manifest the same way. So that's kind of where I come from in most of my writing and teaching at this point, is that we really have to, and it's a process and a learning curve for sure, but we have to really discover what's true for our kids and be very mindful of that in our parenting and really work from that place.
Well, so much of what you just said regarding your individual experience with your child is so much of what we're about here at Core Brain Journal, Penny. I don't know how much you know about what we do, but we're so interested in getting beyond the surface of things and how people look, and getting into what's the underlying issue. And that's just what you were talking about. There's more to it than just some kind of cookie cutter diagnosis, that human beings have a complexity, a unique complexity that's their own. And what we really need to do as professionals, as parents, as colleagues, if it's an adult individual, is really look at them as individuals and look at the complexity of contributory factors. I mean, it used to be when I was a kid, it was all psychoanalysis. Something happened in childhood, And in these 45 years I've been in practice, we've gone into much more of a biologic realm, and we understand there are many mitigating factors that can interfere with a person's development. Now, I'm going to ask you another question, because as you were talking about your individual experience with your son, a couple of things came to mind, and really, without becoming microscopic, but perhaps being just a little bit more on a magnifying glass way, if you don't mind. It's a little personal question. But what were the differentiating factors as you were struggling with your son there and you were thinking about, hey, something's not right here? What was it that caused you as a concerned mom to continue to see and explore and try to find out what else was going on, to come to these other conclusions? What was the drive there?
So once he reached, I would say, about 10 years old, his social interactions were becoming a lot more complex. And what the one probably biggest red flag for us that it wasn't just ADHD was that he did not understand someone else's intention toward him. So boys notoriously pick on each other, and it's kind of this camaraderie. And if someone, just kind of pecks at you and says you're stupid, but they're laughing when they say it, they're your friend, they're just messing around with you. To him, it was they're bullying him, he should call the police, it's the end of the world, they'll never speak again. So really, he'd always been a very concrete, literal thinker like that, but this felt like it really went beyond that. And by 10, he should have been understanding that a little bit more, or learning from others around him, trying to take in, well, if he's in a group of guys and they're all laughing, then it must have been something fun and funny and not a serious criticism. But he didn't take in that other body language and people's tone of voice, and that really signified the possibility of autism for us.
Well, without
because
being
while
simplistic, he couldn't take a joke.
Exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
I don't want to trivialize a very important, challenging moment for you and your family, but he just couldn't connect effectively with the game that's growing up boys. It's a growing up boys game. It's what boys do. It's what adult men do. I mean, it's what happens when I go to the gym. I'm still, if you forgive the expression, getting pimped on a regular basis when I walk in the gym. It's just what happens.
Right. He couldn't interpret all the nuance. He heard the words and he interpreted them literally. He interpret all the other social nuance. And kids with ADHD certainly have social skills issues and struggles. They do struggle to make and keep friends. But this seemed more significant to me. That's really what kind of tipped me off, was that it seemed much more deep of an issue, I think. He was very stuck.
He was not, pardon me for being, completely colloquial about the whole thing, but he was stuck in a situation. You were doing everything right. You had a good doctor. Probably he was on some kind of medication. I'm going to ask you about that in a moment. And everything looked quite good in terms of the evolution of his thinking, in certain respects, in terms of his skills at managing himself academically, probably, because he sounds like a bright boy. But then the social thing, with the complexity of nuances that occur in social relationships, which is because it's a complexity, and anybody that has an executive function problem is going to have more problems with complexity and more problems with changing complexities. That's one of the problems.
Exactly.
So what happens is, but he had a certain predictable level of complexity that he just couldn't get. And that's what you were saying, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
So then how did you change was he on medication? I want to ask you that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so he's been on medication for ADHD, stimulant medication, since he was 6. Within a few weeks of diagnosis, because we had already been doing a lot of behavior modification, not consciously, but we and his teacher, he had a really good teacher at school that year. And so the doctor said, you've already really addressed a lot of what you would try before medication, and this is really the next step. And so we didn't know enough about it. We were pretty much the ignorant public about stimulant medication, but we decided to research it. And he was a really defeated kid before he was diagnosed.
When you say that, what do you mean?
He never could really meet expectations. He felt like he was always in trouble, like he just couldn't get it right no matter what he did.
Mm-hmm.
He cried a lot as a 5-year-old. And, I can go back and look at pictures in the family album and see and remember how really sad he was.
Mm-hmm.
Before we figured that piece out for him. So we felt like we really needed to do something that was going to make a big difference for him, and that we were certainly willing to try that. And it has made a difference for him. It's not perfect. He's a very sensitive kid. He has a lot of bad reactions to a lot of medications, especially SSRIs. And even some vitamins and supplements. So we kind of have a moderate dose, and it helps some. Maybe it could be better, but then the anxiety ramps up and some other things happen. So we've learned over time just to find that balance, that we can't expect perfection. And I think, parents starting out with these diagnoses, they still have in their mind that stereotypical kid and what that's supposed to be like. And so they're still sort of pushing for that fix to what's going on, to normalize, as you said. And you have to learn over time that all you're going to do is spin your wheels as long as you're trying to normalize a kid with ADHD or autism.
So what was the treatment plan change that you achieved when you then found someone to work with you on the spectrum diagnosis, where he had a different, yes, it was a different label, but that was really implying there was a different functionality below the surface. So how did that change your treatment approach with him at that time?
It didn't really change our treatment. He still maintained the same medication. I think that it was really more about us understanding better, the school understanding better.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like the autism label was going to get us further within the school system than the ADHD label did. That has been slightly true, but not nearly as much as I expected, because he's such a high-functioning kid. And I hate the term high-functioning.
Mm-hmm.
It drives me crazy because they're not high-functioning. That's why they have the label in the first place. So when you tell someone who doesn't know better that your kid has high-functioning autism, they think that, oh, they're a high-functioning kid. And so not true. But, that's kind of how we've come to differentiate it from the nonverbal autistic. So that's the label that I'm forced to use. But,
well, I think
he does have a gifted...
You please. I'm sorry I interrupted you. I apologize.
That's okay. I just was going to say he does have a gifted... Yeah. Yeah, so he's twice exceptional, and that makes it a lot harder for people who really don't understand his disabilities. They see that intelligence and they expect more.
Yeah, that's what I was going to clarify. I was going to ask you about it. I assume that that's what it was, because high functioning oftentimes it documents a certain capacity of intelligence, which is exactly what you said. I apologize for interrupting.
Mm-hmm. No, not a problem.
A person can have an underlying complexity that continues to throw them off in the ordinary developmental tasks that one would expect as they're growing older, in terms of how they go to the parties and how they have friends and how they resolve arguments and
right.
How they hold themselves accountable and get things done. All those things can be modified. In fact, my experience, I don't know where you are with this, Penny, but I see a lot of quote unquote, as you say, high functioning, intelligent individuals that really wind up being even more challenged, in the sense that because they're so smart, others find them intimidating. I mean, it's like being a good-looking cheerleader, the girls are going to have a problem with her unless she is really gracious and really warm and pleasant, because just by being attractive, it can be a problem. And just by being intelligent, it can be a problem, because others may be jealous or intimidated by those external attributes.
Right. Right. And you said complexity, and that's really a defining word for my son in particular. He is super complex, and I think that in general, people don't understand how complex ADHD and autism really are. We get those high level symptoms that are used to diagnose, but there's so much more to it. And that was where I struggled for 2 or 3 years, was just trying to figure out all those other pieces that I didn't know I was looking for or looking at, and what to do with and about those to help him.
So then let me ask you this question. This goes to the heart of your work in your books. So do you have some specific protocols, suggestions? Do you have a grid that you can throw out there for our audience regarding parents and how they approach these matters? And could you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, I can give you kind of a general overview of that. I could talk for days and weeks in detail about that. But I think, the overarching kind of the umbrella of our parenting should be a positive parenting approach. We have to kind of throw out that traditional punishments and consequences, which is really parenting through fear anyway, which is not healthy for our kids. But when you start to take a positive parenting approach, you are building up your child. You're helping their self-esteem, you're helping their self-confidence, because you are stressing more their strengths and talents and interests and passions than their weaknesses. And that's what these kids need the most, because they go to school and they get all these messages about how they're broken, they're not as capable as their peers, what have you. And so as parents, our real focus has to be, okay, what are they good at, and how do we make that more of their story than their disability? And it can be hard. And when my son was little, his hyperactivity was all you could see. I mean, he was off the wall literally every moment, and that really just claimed every bit of our energy, and it was hard to really work past that. But as they get older, it's a little bit easier because more self-awareness, self-regulation comes in, a little bit of maturity, and so those things start to get easier to really get them more, get more time into their interests. And it can be anything. It can be video games. A lot of parents want to restrict video game usage and that sort of thing. And I feel like if that's what, my son definitely loves video games, and he spends somewhat of a good bit of time with it, because that's what makes him feel good about himself. That's what makes him feel successful and like he can be successful at something. And so even that can be nurtured through coding classes. He's in robotics club after school. So, it can be the traditional stuff like scouts and going out and riding your bike and all that stuff too. And certainly activity is important. But what I'm saying is, if your child's really into video games, don't fight it, kind of work with it, because it's where they are feeling successful and good about themselves. That's why they're spending so much time on it. That's why they're so interested.
Yeah, just to take that point a little further, to actually help them elaborate on that in some constructive way, rather than just being stuck with the games and killing times repeatedly doing something. So where are they going to go? What's the next game that they're going to get? How can they do something with others who are on the same game path, and actually then have something constructive with a gaming club or whatever, so that it becomes part of their life in a constructive way, as opposed to, okay, we're just going to, support games, and we know that that's helpful because he feels good about it. But you're saying really take it to another level, really. Right.
I mean, you don't want to just have him in the basement playing video games every moment of every day that he has available. That's not constructive at all. But, this is the first year. My son is in 8th grade. He's 14 now. And this is the first year that he's ever had real, true friends. And he made these friends by discussing games that they liked and, those similar interests. And that's how he was finally able to connect and have, a group of kids who wanted to be around him and wanted, He's had sleepovers this year, and it's just been a totally different social experience because he had that really good connection through what he was interested in. So, it can be a benefit in a lot of ways, but you definitely have to manage it. He wants to do something with computer science as a career later. So he's working, in that area, it works with that as well. So I think just anything that we can really support them in when they're feeling good about it or they're passionate about it. If they really like animals, have them volunteer at the animal shelter, help them start a little dog walking business, whatever it might be. It's just really important to spend as much time as possible on those things and less time talking about weaknesses and diagnoses.
Well, it's interesting, just to elaborate a little further on what you're saying, because I'm thinking about the process, and so often when a person is labeled, they are by definition stuck within the context of that reductionistic concept, perception. So that what happens is, what you're saying is, don't stick with the label, find the humanity of the human being, and help them find the path that they can actually elaborate upon and become a fully developed human being instead of being stuck developmentally with some kind of label. In that regard, I loved your quote here. I thought it was very good in your bio material that you sent in advance, the Einstein quote, where he said, everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid.
Exactly.
So true. I mean, that's really, society then puts a certain measure of, this is what we believe about you. And what you're saying is informed parents need to move past that, move into a different level and go on from there.
Right. So there's this whole guidebook about childhood and raising kids and what to expect at different developmental ages. And, we're all raised to believe a certain standard about childhood and parenting. And when you have a kid with ADHD or autism, you really have to kind of throw that book out and let your child be the guide with where you're really going to go. Their needs, both positive and negative, strengths and weaknesses, are really, to be the most effective parent for them that you can, that needs to be your compass. That needs to be what guides you. And not to say that guides you to kind of be hands off and not care about, say your child interrupts a lot. It's not that it's okay to interrupt people for the rest of their life. It's that we understand why they do it and we work on that behavior to improve it. But we don't punish it because we know there's more behind it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You want to emphasize the growth part of it instead of emphasizing, really, for want of a better word, codifying them and putting them into a box somehow.
Right. And for a long time, when my son was diagnosed with ADHD, I let ADHD be an excuse for everything. And it taught him some learned helplessness really quickly. And it was a very bad path to go down. And it was a little bit hard to backtrack out of. But, it's really hard, and I get asked that question all the time from parents. Where's the balance? Where is the point where there should be punishment and consequences versus the point of, I understand because I know you have ADHD or you have autism? And sometimes that's really hard to find. One of our therapists once said that kids with ADHD and autism are going to act out the same amount as a neurotypical kid their age, and anything beyond that is probably due to their lagging skills or their disability. And I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb to try to follow. But yeah, you really have to just rewrite the book on parenting for this specifically.
Well, that's such an interesting point. Thanks for sharing that point, because then it gives a person a certain perspective to think about what they're doing and to really ease off the emotional tone of I think parents get so caught up with I've got to fix my kid.
Yes.
And they feel this sense of overwhelming responsibility when no disrespect, they really don't know what they're doing. They
Exactly.
don't have an idea about the complexity of that child. They're just in their minds like this is what a good parent should do. And this is why people like you, Penny, are so valuable to the conversation, because you're saying, look, folks, we need to think about this whole, as they say in Philadelphia, this whole mashbuka completely differently. It's got this, there's a whole different set of criteria that we need to use for human beings. And just coming in and saying, I'm going to train my kid to behave is not the appreciation of the complexity that the child deserves.
Right, right. And what you described was where I lived for the first 2 years. I was looking to fix it. And I knew that there was no cure, but I somehow still felt like there must be some way to fix it, to make it better, because I didn't want him to struggle and suffer. And that's what took me a really long time to figure that out, because we're just not given all that information when we're given diagnoses. It makes it a whole lot tougher.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was just going to say that's why people need to read the book, because you really do bring a refreshing angle to this whole conversation. If a person, all of us are deep individuals. We're not running around in cookie cutter lives. Our minds are filled with layers of things that we're concerned about. I don't know why we as parents would think this is good behavior and that's bad behavior and that's the end of it. It just doesn't work that way. I think so much of a challenge is, how do we actually raise our child to think that we can be friends with them when they're adults? I mean, that's more, it doesn't mean that you have to be friendly with the child all along, because leadership is leadership, and taking a parental set of providing structure is important. But having a sense of you appreciate what they're actually struggling with is a completely different thing than just setting limits.
Yeah, I mean, it's trying to put yourself in their shoes and see the world from their perspective. And I don't have ADHD, I don't have autism. So for me, that was really what guided me to write the third book. Was I wanted to know as much as possible about what my son experiences and how he kind of bumps around through the world and what that's like for him, because I felt like that was the most helpful perspective for me to parent from. And it was really enlightening. There were a lot of assumptions that I had made that were right on, and there were some that were not. And, there are some big ahas from these adults, like, school really isn't that important and grades really don't matter that much. And a lot of people would cringe at that. When I was growing up, if I got a C on a report card, I was grounded because I was smart, so I should be able to get A's and B's. And I didn't have any learning disabilities or any of that. So, I guess that was a decent expectation, but certainly something that I had to throw out when my son came along and realized that, sometimes a C for him is like an A plus. Mm-hmm. It just depends on, because the school is just trying to put all of our kids in this very defined box where they don't fit. So there's a lot. There are so many assumptions about parenting that we really have to teach ourselves to throw out, to detach from, to not care about, not get emotional about.
You're going to really enjoy this person. This is several weeks before this is going to be published for you, so it will be out by the time your episode here is published. But you do want to listen to corebrainjournal.com/093, Dr. Zach Stein, who has a PhD from Harvard in education and labels, and has a very interesting conversation. I interviewed him a couple of weeks ago now, and just got his pulled his material together. It's going to be published tomorrow morning, real time, for you,
right,
but it's going to be much sooner than your episode will come up. Your episode is going to come up in probably several weeks, 3 or 4 weeks. So,
okay.
But listen, before we wind up,
I'll check that out
up a little bit. This is a great conversation. It's so helpful. A lot of people, I'm sure, are thinking, "Gosh, this is a really useful perspective. This is something I can take home and use." Give us the website that you'd like to tell us where we can. I'll have it in the show notes, but let's tell our listeners who are riding in the car where they can go.
Yes, so parentingadhdandautism.com is the main website. That'll take you to anything else. The books are listed there. There's lots of articles. There are some how-to videos. I do webinars pretty frequently. There's a calendar there for that. And that will also take you to the Parenting ADHD and Autism Academy with the different online courses that I have to offer.
Well, that's great. Who do you? I'm going to ask you a quick question because the course thing. Do you develop your own website on that training course thing, or how did you do all that?
I use Teachable as my platform. Yeah. And that made it really easy to pull together, and it's really user friendly for students on the other end. And the courses are just all video trainings. The main course, the complete guide to parenting ADHD, which is a very step-by-step kind of A to Z, every single thing I've learned and obsessed about in 8 years in that one course, and walking parents through all of these things about what assumptions they have to throw out, how they determine triggers, how to help at school, that just kind of the whole process is there in that course and broken up into a lot of really small videos. Most of them are 15 minutes or less, so that busy families, chaotic families, can kind of digest as they can. And I think, I know some people have found it super helpful so far. It's been out there about 9 months or so, I guess, at this point. So it's fairly new. But I really wanted to work with parents on a more personal level. The books are great, and a lot of people, it's very accessible to them. But I really wanted to be more involved and really work with these families in a more meaningful, what I felt like was a more meaningful way. So that's why I developed courses and do some mentoring and that sort of thing too.
We're thinking on the same path, I'll tell you that. No question about it. Really appreciate it. So the coursework is available at that same website then?
Yes.
Parenting, yeah.
Yes, it'll link you right there.
Good. Well, listen, with that, I think we're going to wind up. We really appreciate your coming on board. Thank you very much, Penny Williams, author, teacher, mentor, mom. You've done a great job. We really appreciate your help tonight, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to Core Brain Journal. We're working every day behind the scenes to bring you reports that connect research benches with those street trenches. Here we share the complexity of mind science because, as you know, details really do matter. One of the most pervasive, misunderstood challenges is how commonplace medications, like those written for ADHD, are used so regularly without clear guidelines. If you think you'd like more specifics, take a minute to download my 2-page PDF packed with video links and references on the absolute essentials of how to start ADHD medications. They're easily available at corebrainjournal.com/start. Thanks for listening. Do connect and stay tuned. Together we can make a difference.